I use Scrum. My sprints are 1 week long, and a product owner and a pack of developers meets on every Monday for grooming. The product owner brings a bunch of Jira tickets to feed the team. Each ticket contains a user story, and it goes something like this. As an editor, I want article categories to be updated when Allegro categories are updated, so that articles are still visible on pages. And the product owner asks the same question every time. How long will that take? And, well, we think a little bit, and then we ask, yeah, but how exactly should it work? I don't know. That's why it's on the grooming. So 3 hours later, we finally have it settled. We now know how it can work. We don't know how it should work. We have a list of questions for our clients. We still have no estimate. We also have some side effects. One developer is sleeping. He's got 2 young kids, so he's excused. 5 developers are bored to death. All developers are tired. 3 most productive hours of the day are gone. Developers hate meetings, and people hate Mondays. So, situation is not perfect. We reflect on what just happened. I have a feeling something's missing. We look back at the definition of a user story. Provide a small-scale and easy-to-use presentation of information with little detail, thus remaining open to interpretation through conversation with on-site customers. Or another definition, user stories are invitation to discussion. All right. Next grooming, we invite the customer to help us, right? We spent another 2 hours on talking. We got answers right away. All developers are tired. People hate Mondays. A young developer tries to implement this feature. He writes some code and tests. He makes a pull request on Friday. On the review, turns out he misunderstood how it should work. A week of work is wasted. We take time to reflect again. A user story is a promise for a conversation. User stories remaining open to interpretation through conversation with on-site customer. Like all the time on-site, sitting next to you and talking with you as you go. That was the problem for the developer. No conversation whatsoever. Isn't the product owner supposed to play the customer role and be there with the team, right? Unfortunately, she doesn't seem to have the answers. That's the problem. Some of our developers will grab the phone, Zoom Hangout, and call our customer directly. These are usually the senior developers. These are people for whom communication is easy. Not all developers are good at communication, though. This is an example. This is Linus Torvalds, and one of the most important developers alive. He's as senior as you can get. He's most famous for Linux, Git, and offending people in horrible ways. He said once, I like offending people because I think people who get offended should be offended. Perhaps we don't want him to call the client after all? In his TED Talk, he makes a good point though. He says, you really need to have the people, the communicators, the warm and friendly people who really want to hug everybody and get you into the community. But that's not everybody. That's not me. IT brings people that are not the best at communication or at humans in general, and allows them to do their best and do something meaningful. So perhaps we don't have to force everyone to be good at communication. Perhaps it's not the problem. How about bringing the real client to us? Well, we are making a product. We have several customers with conflicting interests. Shall we invite all of them? And perhaps working next to our customer all the time will make some of us nervous and unproductive. Perhaps that's not needed. We got all the answers on grooming with the customer, we just failed to use them. So if you look at the problem again, all we need is to optimize meetings, make them shorter, to write down requirements so we cannot get them wrong when we implement them the next time. How do we do that? Well, fortunately, I read a good book 15 years ago. It was about use cases. A use case is intended to provide sufficient detail for it to be understood on its own. No discussions required. Okay, this is a full-blown use case the way it looks like, right? I used to write these on a daily basis for almost 2 years, 14 years ago. You may not need all those points, but you have to think about most of them when you implement stuff, okay? In fact, the most important things are the main success scenario and all the corner cases, here called extensions. These describe step by step how the system behaves, and it doesn't require any user at all. User stories come from extreme programming. The reason why extreme programming guys managed to live without written documentation was that actually all the requirements were already written down as executable tests or specifications if you use behavior-driven development terms. And it looks like that. And the behavior-driven development spec has got everything you need. All is there. Beautiful. Well, I use test-driven development since 2005. I also teach test and behavior-driven development. And when I teach behavior-driven development, I start with an exercise on designing specifications in plain English. The exercise is to write the rest of the scenarios for this simple story about returning things in a shop. I play the domain expert role. Students can ask me any questions they want. Now, I have to digress here. You remember the famous Volkswagen cheat of last year? Do you know who went to jail for that? Not the CEO, not the customer, not the product owner, but the developer who actually wrote the code and implemented the cheat, okay? This is how the law works in the US. The funny thing is, this is exactly how the law works in Poland as well. So, at the beginning of my workshop, 98% of developers would go to jail for the scenarios that they wrote. Incredible. Why? Well, people are reckless, people do not pay attention, all developers suck at writing scenarios without proper training and experience, and nobody expects this to be hard. This should be simple. Well, it is hard. There are books about it. There are people doing this for a living, like business analysts, system analysts, right? And notice here that they deliver non-functional requirements. You can't even write non-functional requirements using user stories. That's not possible. And in case you were wondering what a non-functional requirement is, it's the requirement that if not met, will make the system non-functional. Simple. So sometimes new features are small and obvious. In such cases, a short discussion is all we need, okay? Other times, our features are more complex and require a more detailed approach. So I wrote a little page on our wiki to help young people remember what it is like to make a proper analysis, okay? On the grooming, when we have a question, but how exactly shall it work? Or if we don't feel like we can estimate something, we change the issue from story to analyze, and we timebox it for a day or two. You can call it a spike. The outcome of such a spike is the wiki page with this. And the first step is to write behavioral specification, usually with 2 people, because 2 people are better than 1, and to call the client, verify it with him, or to just verify it with some of the customer, product owner, whoever can answer your questions and check if it's okay. Then the next step is to write behavior-driven development scenarios, the given, when, then. It is crucial that you write both the main acceptance scenario and all the extensions, edge cases. Because main scenario is not enough. A lot of complexity comes from handling edge cases. We will need to analyze them anyway, and if we do it in this step, our estimation will be much better. The third step is to write down all non-functional requirements. What is the expected traffic? What stress test do we have to add? What monitoring we have to add? What are the thresholds for the new metrics? The step 4 is to design the architecture. And you can think about the evolutionary architecture there, but really, it's easy to actually have a little bit of thinking then up front and just verify with colleagues and show and present how do you want it to work? How do you want it to fit into the rest of the software and the rest of the code? Otherwise, you create a big ball of mud, usually. So here, we want to design a few different solutions and compare them. For each of them, write down all the advantages and disadvantages that you can see. Why? Well, if you can see just one solution, you're blind. Work harder. A sequence diagram is nice here. Splitting it into the modules is nice as well. And remember, when you do this, you want to design to simplify the code and the system, not to make it more complex. The fifth step is to get approvals. Well, we work with pull requests, so we know exactly how it looks like. You just ask people to read through your web page and like it, or not, or just comment it. You need at least one person, 2 would be perfect. And then we can do the estimate, and we don't have to do the estimate on the grouping as well. We can do it in a Google Docs, for example, when we create 1 tab per person in a team, and you can send it to all the team, right? And every single person will verify, read this thing, estimate it themselves, and then we can have a meeting or during the grouping or a separate meeting just to discuss what we think about all of this and to have shared understanding. But everything else is done offline. One of the developers was disappointed when even this analysis turned out to need a different solution in the final, in the implementation. But that is normal, that is expected. Big design upfront doesn't work because we work with wicked problems. No design upfront also doesn't work. Plans are useless, planning is important, everybody knows that. Do not expect to design a final solution, expect to eliminate waste and learn through experiments, and thought experiments are cheaper than coding. And refining requirements is actually a difficult art. Don't take it for granted. There are many methods of gathering requirements, but product owners usually fixate on stories, on user stories, and then teams follow them. And this is dangerous. Now, our grooming right now takes usually between half an hour and an hour and a half. So if your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. User stories are great for discussion, but discussion is not always what your team needs the most. Make sure your team has more tools in their toolbox. Thank you.